Well, I mean, right now, you've got career people serving in the acting roles. And I will tell you, having worked in the community for a really long time, folks in the OIG are some of the most committed to mission people you will find in the federal government. And so I fully expect them to take that mission seriously and to do the hard work and to call the balls and strikes.
Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, navigating the Trump administration as an inspector general. Former State Department acting IG Diana Shaw joins the podcast. It's Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's dive into today's top headlines. The Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency team is examining the Navy's software enterprise, the service's chief information officer said on Tuesday. The review comes as the administration is undertaking a broad look at the Defense Department's and other federal agencies' contracts and workforce in search of what it considers wasteful spending and opportunities for savings. The Navy has been pursuing an initiative known as Information Superiority Vision 2.0, the service's CIO Jane Rathbun noted during a panel Tuesday at the Sea Air Space Conference. She said that the DOGE, via the Pentagon CIO's office, is working with her team looking into effective consumption of commercial software, adding that, quote, the Department of Defense spends like $5.2 billion on just software. The Navy is a huge consumer of software, Rathbun noted, sharing that, for example, it has more than 800,000 software licenses from Microsoft alone. That, she said, leads to natural questions of, quote, are we buying effectively? Are we utilizing the things that we're buying effectively? Rathbun said there's always an opportunity for improvement. In other news, after accessing data at the Department of Homeland Security, including systems operated by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency now appears to be behind a new effort to shrink the agency's staff. On Monday, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem sent a message to employees encouraging them to leave the agency, according to an email viewed by FedScoop. The message explained details of deferred resignation, voluntary early retirement, and voluntary separation incentive payment programs. USCIS sent a separate email, also viewed by FedScoop, explaining aspects of the reduction in force programs. Over the weekend, news outlets reported that DOGE, the White House, and DHS leaders had participated in a range of conversations about staffing cuts. Those come as the Trump administration has weighed ways to reduce the agency's scope, including through arguments that disaster assistance should be handled by the states, setting the stage for the potential dismantling of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The reduction in force efforts followed DOGE gaining access to DHS systems. Last week, FedScoop reported that members of DOGE have now entered USCIS IT systems, prompting a response from House Oversight Committee Democrats who called for the Musk-led group's access to the systems unacceptable. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. Just days into his latest run as president, Donald Trump fired 17 inspectors general across the federal government. The move not only set off alarms in the government oversight and accountability community, but it also set an early precedent for how the Trump administration would deal with entities that he saw as threatening to his agenda as president. Diana Shaw has spent much of her career in the shoes of federal inspectors general, having served as acting IG of the State Department and in a variety of roles in DHS's Office of the IG before retiring from government in 2024. So she knows as well as anyone through her continued connections and deep experience how IGs in the Trump administration are navigating the current dynamic, what's at play as they maneuver around the work of the DOGE, and how things will continue to unfold. Now a partner at DC law firm Wiley Rein LLP, Shaw joins me now to discuss all of that, as well as her thoughts on one of the biggest IG cases going on in government, the Pentagon's probe into the Secretary of Defense's use of commercial messaging applications like Signal to conduct official business. Let's go now to that interview with Diana Shaw. Diana, thanks so much for joining me on the Daily Scoop podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you have a wealth of experience in government oversight and accountability, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your expertise. You were the acting inspector general, deputy inspector general at the State Department, and also had a number of different roles in the inspector general's office at DHS. So obviously a wealth of knowledge and understanding in this space. And there's a lot going on as it regards accountability, oversight, and the work of IGs in the federal government. So really looking forward to contextualizing all that's going on and hearing more from you about that.
Great.
So let's start, I think, top of mind with a lot of folks and most current in terms of the things I'd like to talk about is, we've all heard by now the what's infamously being referred to as Signalgate, the incident in which a number of national security, highest national security officials use Signal to discuss plans about a strike in Yemen. So it sounds like a couple lawmakers have called on the Department of Defense Inspector General to look into that. So I'd love to start there and sort of hear what's your take on the latest in that situation as things stand today.
Sure. So I am not at all surprised that the committee decided to refer this to the OIG. I think that's exactly why you have an OIG. When you have an issue like this and you really want to get to ground truth, you want objective fact finding, that the OIG is exactly who you want to go to. So what's interesting, I think, about this referral, when I looked at the questions that were sent over, they're very focused on process and policy, which typically to me would indicate an audit, an OIG audit. If the OIG takes on this work, and they're not required to do that, but if they do and they scope it as an audit, then I would expect that to take some time. But that should result in a public-facing report and would not only lay out sort of the facts of what happened, but also presumably include recommendations on ways that policy and process could be improved. But I've also seen lots of calls for a referral for an investigation, and that would be something very different. Usually an investigation done by an OIG would be something that has some kind of criminal or civil exposure. It could be an administrative review, but in that case, it would be much less public. It would not necessarily result in a public-facing report, and so there would be far less visibility around the final outcome of that. So we'll have to see which way the OIG goes, assuming that it does take on this work. I think it would be hard-pressed not to, just given the public level of interest in it, but we'll have to see.
And the interesting thing, I think, in the distinguishing of the two is typically with an audit, there would be, I'm speaking to my understanding of it, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but there would be
Sure.
recommendations that the IG might share with the department or whomever about that. Whereas in an investigation, what would the outcome be in different, the gravity of what the outcome would be different from that audit?
So you're exactly right. Typically, a recommendation in an audit would focus on a process improvement. Perhaps there's a lack of clarity around what the procedures are, and so there would be suggestions for greater communication, greater clarity in the policy. The implications of an investigation are very different. If it's an administrative review, basically OIGs do the fact finding, but they do not recommend specific discipline, and they do not enforce discipline. So essentially, they'd be handing over the facts to the department. And in this case, it's a little tricky because it involves the senior most person in the department for whatever action the department considers appropriate. But if there's some level of civil misconduct or criminal misconduct, in that case, the matter would be presented to DOJ and potentially a prosecution could follow.
Interesting. And it brings me to a point, and I think it's an apt one because, as you mentioned, the senior most Defense Department official could potentially be a focus of this. And yet we've seen very early in this administration where IGs have been the target of the administration and have been let go, fired in a number of cases across agencies. So talk to me about that. Let's pivot that way a little bit. Not saying that that's the case or that might occur, but we have seen it happen in which IGs have been let go because of the political nature of this administration. So, with that in mind, how should IGs think about doing their job, whether it's the Department of Defense or another department, as they understand that they may have folks in the administration keeping an eye on them and take action if something doesn't go as they hope?
Well, I mean, right now, you've got career people serving in the acting roles. And I will tell you, having worked in the community for a really long time, folks in the OIG are some of the most committed to mission people you will find in the federal government. And so I fully expect them to take that mission seriously and to do the hard work and to call the balls and strikes. Anytime you take on an issue that has this level of public interest and a political overlay, it's always fraught, right? It's always a little higher temperature in the room when you think about that. So certainly that's going to be something that they're considering, but the work has to get done. And so I fully expect that team, if they take it on, to be thinking about that, to be scoping it appropriately, and to be doing that work. And then, once the work is done and the report and the findings get handed over, what the Senate committee does with that, what the public and the media do with that, that's ultimately a totally different question than what the fact finders are about. And that's really just objective truth.
That's great to hear. I'm have been thinking a lot about, there's now it seems like we hear about it every day, so it doesn't feel new, but still relatively new organization within government, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which on paper shares a lot of the same mission that an IG might, in terms of seeking efficiencies and reducing waste and trying to cut down on unnecessary government spending, fraud, although I'm not sure how much of that it's actually found. So I'm curious, with this new organization existing, and we can dive in a little bit more deeply in some follow-up questions, but just on its, most basic level, how do you feel the IG community is thinking about this new organization, this new dog on the block, so to speak?
Well, it's so different from what we do in the OIG community. I mean, the approach is just completely different, but as you said, kind of the same shared objectives. So I see them as just different tools in the administration's toolbox. I mean, OIGs have to perform their work to very rigorous professional standards. That's why the work takes time. And I know, from personal experience that can be frustrating when you're looking for quick answers, but you want those answers when they're produced to be reliable. And so those professional standards exist for that reason. But it means that things don't happen quickly. And so, watching how DOGE is operating, they seem to be using a very agile method to try to get at quick information, quick findings. And so to me, it's just a very different approach to the work. What I think will be interesting to see is over time whether there's any effort to sort of combine forces to see if there's a way for DOGE to partner with OIGs because of the work that OIGs are doing. It's incredibly useful. They have so much institutional knowledge about the departments that they oversee. And so I see them as potentially an incredible and fertile resource for DOGE in their future efforts. So I'm interested to see whether that kind of partnership develops over time. But for now, I see them as two very different tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, and I think your point is completely valid. That I remember seeing this great New York Times piece recently where inspectors general were discussing the billions and billions of dollars that they've saved individually at their departments, and it seems baffling that a DOGE, this is me kind of editorializing, but baffling that they wouldn't rely on that established community of insight and expertise to kind of lean into that and partner, as you said.
One thing I will just add on that point, I think you make a perfect point there, because there are right now, I just looked at the website oversight.gov today where they track open OIG recommendations. There are almost 15,000 open OIG recommendations as of today. These are recommendations that OIGs have issued that have just yet to be implemented. And they represent billions and billions of dollars in potential savings and efficiencies. I do think that is a very a good place to start if you're looking to really drive efficiency. And so I would hope that at some point someone would give some thought to how do we get on top of those open recommendations and come up with an action plan to really hit those at least that will have the highest impact. and try to make good on the investment that we've already made in that work and the findings that we already have there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And the final thought and question I have on DOGE is we've seen in some cases where lawmakers have also asked inspectors general to look into the DOGE itself. Is that how I'm sure it works no differently than you would audit or investigate any other federal organization, but any thoughts about that? And, it is a part of the executive office of the president. Are there any sort of limitations there as it regards, presidential privilege or a White House organization being, at the being looked into by an IG?
Yeah, so there are limitations. There is not an IG for the White House. And so the way that it's set up, depending on how it is set up, and that's, I think, been fluid over time, it's not entirely clear. But if it is purely embedded within the White House, that wouldn't fall within any OIG's jurisdiction. However, based on some court filings that I've looked at, it sounds like part of the way that DOGE operates is that the DOGE teams will actually embed within agencies. And in some instances, those DOGE team members will become employees of that agency in order to have the access and authority that they need to complete their work. And in that case, I do think they would arguably come under the jurisdiction of an OIG for oversight. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see. This is kind of a novel setup. And a new situation, not one that I think we've encountered in the OIG community before. So it'll be interesting to see whether OIGs interpret their jurisdiction as extending to DOGE, and if they do, whether they take on work conducting oversight of their operations.
Yeah, and you're very correct in, I think, saying that they wouldn't be investigating DOGE itself as it's a White House organization, but rather it's work with those agencies, and that's where that sort of interaction would occur. So that's sort of a correction for me on my end. I'm curious, it seems that, and maybe this is just my lack of a greater knowledge of the IG space, but it feels like many things in this government space right now, it's become hyper political, at least in the way that IGs, as we talked about at the top of our interview, have been targeted and let go. I'm curious, with politics being brought into what otherwise is a very independent, objective, apolitical function within government, how IGs should think about doing their job going forward, or is it, really just keep doing what you do and, hold your head down and get to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real tension there. I think what we've seen is that the administration has expressed a view on how the executive branch should work. And it really seems to be a view in which all aspects of the executive branch are kind of rowing all in the same direction, and no element is working independent of any other element. But OIGs have a statutory obligation. They are required by law to operate independently and to pursue their work in a particular way, and to be objective. And so there's a tension there. And I have to imagine that those in the OIG community are going to follow the law and pursue the mission in accordance with the law. So I think, the vast majority of the work that OIGs do is not going to rise to the level of anything of interest on a political stage. So I think for that work will continue. It'll be independent, it'll be objective. I think for the small amount of it that does seem to catch headlines and could potentially be politicized, that's going to be trickier. And we'll have to see how that plays out.
And then finally, in speaking about, preserving accountability and oversight in IGs in light of all of this, what are you keeping an eye on? What's important to you moving forward in this space as we continue to watch sort of how this role shifts or is fluid in this new administration?
Well, I think what is very interesting is something that I'm noticing in this administration, this Trump administration, that feels different than the first time. I think the first Trump administration, and that was when I was in the OIG community, I really think that in many ways, OIGs were viewed as kind of a roadblock to trying to advance administration priorities, and throwing up a lot of hurdles to getting things done. And so there was a real frustration about OIGs and an effort to kind of just keep them at arm's length. I think what we're seeing in this administration is at least a willingness to explore the possibility of OIGs and traditional oversight as a tool for the administration to use to actually further their priorities. So we've seen instances where the administration is referring matters to the OIG as opposed to, kind of keeping the OIG on the sidelines. We've already seen 2 IG nominations come out. And so I think that we're seeing early signs that this administration is interested in partnering with OIGs on oversight. But as you know, right, OIGs are supposed to be independent. So whether that's going to ultimately become an issue or not, I think we have to see. But I think that's going to have real implications for companies that contract with the government, because I think no matter what, there's going to be a lot of oversight going on, whether that's the traditional OIG oversight or through DOGE. And so we are counseling our government contracting clients to be prepared for an increase in scrutiny, an increase in oversight, and we're starting to help them understand how to prepare for this non-traditional form of oversight that's coming through DOGE.
I think that's a great thought and a perfect way to, look forward as we wrap up. Diana, it's been fantastic speaking with you. I really appreciate it. And, definitely look forward to future interactions, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. For more on oversight and accountability in the federal government, visit fedscoop.com. The Daily Scoop podcast is available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back next week with brand new episodes. Until then, I'm your host, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.